During the autumn of 2013, a French archaeologist by the name of Pierre Tallet conducted fieldwork along a secluded segment of the Red Sea coastline, far removed from the typical tourist trails and iconic landmarks. He was investigating a series of subterranean galleries carved directly into the bedrock, ancient storage chambers that had been sealed off by substantial limestone slabs. Upon breaching the seals and stepping inside, he realized that he was the first human to stand in that stillness for 4.5 millennia. Scattered across the floor were fragments of papyrus, hundreds of them representing the most ancient, inscribed scrolls ever unearthed on this planet. One might naturally assume such relics would contain sacred hymns, prayers for the departed, or royal edicts meant to echo through time. Yet, these documents were none of those things. What Tallet had discovered was a mundane work log, a daily ledger maintained by an ordinary man simply fulfilling his professional obligations. His name was Mirror, and in the parlance of our modern era, he functioned as a mid-level project manager. The endeavor he oversaw, none other than the Great Pyramid of Giza. For the first time in our history, we possess the written accounts of a man who participated in the pyramid's construction. He was neither a pharaoh nor a member of the priesthood. He was a working supervisor, recording his logistical shipments, tracking his daily progress, and ensuring his team remained on schedule, never once imagining that his bookkeeping would long outlast his civilization. For the next half hour, we will diverge from the path taken by most pyramid documentaries. We intend to prioritize evidence over mythology. We will investigate what is genuinely established, identify the specific enigmas that persist, and discover why the authentic answers are far more intriguing than any theory you have previously encountered. But first, it is essential to sweep away 2 centuries of sensationalized nonsense. We begin with the most enduring narrative, the claim that the pyramids were constructed by slaves. This powerful imagery, hundreds of thousands of souls laboring under the lash, sacrificing their lives for a monarch's tomb, has captivated the imagination for ages. It is crucial to understand why this fallacy persisted. Its origin traces back to Herodotus, a Greek historian who visited Egypt around 450 BC. Over 2 millennia after the Great Pyramid's completion, he was told, and subsequently recorded, that 100,000 men toiled there in wretchedness. That narrative was echoed for 2,000 years, and cinema eventually codified it into visual shorthand whips, chains, and suffering on an industrial scale. However, in 1990, the landscape changed. A tourist riding near the plateau was unseated when their horse tripped over a low, mud brick wall. That structure was revealed to be a tomb. Behind it lay an entire necropolis, the final resting place of the individuals who actually constructed the pyramids. Situated within the literal shadow of the monuments, these were not the burials of slaves. The laborers were interred with honors, accompanied by bread and beer for the afterlife, under the gaze of their sovereign, a distinction no enslaved person would ever be afforded. Their remains provide further testimony. Many skeletal remains display fractures that were set and mended by proficient medical practitioners. This was a workforce that received genuine health care and was, by all accounts, nourished exceptionally well. Archaeologist Zahi Hawass estimated that approximately 21 cattle and 23 sheep were delivered to the site. Every day a meat ration sufficient to sustain a small town. Mirror's diary provides the granular detail that the bones alone cannot. These were organized, rotated crews provisioned by the state. Their shipments were logged into precise columns by an administrator whose duty was to ensure accountability. This is not the ledger of a slave camp. It is the administrative documentation of a professional employer. The second fallacy is more contemporary and, in a sense, more complementary to our own ego, the notion that the pyramids are too vast, too precise, and too perfect to be the result of human endeavor alone. The implication is that some external force must have intervened, The lure of this theory is understandable. The Great Pyramid consists of over 2 million blocks, averaging the weight of a family sedan, and its faces are oriented toward the cardinal points with a level of precision that would challenge a modern surveyor. Standing at the foundation and gazing upward, the idea that ordinary people achieve this with nothing more than fiber ropes and human effort can feel impossible. Yet the data points stubbornly toward human actors. Mirror's diary outlines the supply chain with simple, prosaic bookkeeping notes, canals, quarries, and delivery timetables. It describes a logistical operation, not a miracle. Certain researchers have sought to push the hypothesis further. In a peer-reviewed article for the Journal of the American Ceramic Society, materials scientist Michel Barson of Drexel University posited that specific blocks, particularly those toward the peak, might have been cast in molds, like early concrete rather than carved. While this remains a minority and highly contested opinion, consider what such an assertion implies: not extraterrestrial machinery, but human ingenuity operating 4.5 millennia ahead of its time. Where the naked eye fails, physics is now probing. Investigators have begun imaging the pyramid's interior using cosmic ray particles. Bypassing the need to move a single stone, every legitimate instrument we possess leads to the same conclusion: humanity. There exists one small puzzle worth noting, despite the millions of tons of dressed stone present on the plateau. Nearly none of the tools used to fashion them have ever been recovered. We shall return to this later. Finally, we address the third myth, the most subtle and resilient of them all, the belief that, in the final analysis, we have no concept of how the pyramids were erected. While this sounds humble and reasonable, it is largely incorrect. We possess extensive knowledge. We know who commissioned, financed, and organized the Egyptian crews. We can date the construction to within a few years. We have identified the origins of the stone, the methods of transport, the workers' diets, their sleeping quarters, and the daily administration of the project. The honest assessment is not that the pyramids remain a total mystery. It is that the remaining mysteries are focused. Genuine questions persist regarding the specific mechanisms for elevating the heaviest stones and what might remain concealed within the sealed chambers. These are legitimate inquiries, and we will address each of them. However, they are narrow, defined, and potentially solvable. That is a vastly different scenario from possessing no knowledge at all. The workers were not slaves. They were not assisted by extraterrestrials. They were, in fact, among the best compensated and best nourished laborers in the ancient world. A fact we know for certain, because one of them recorded his life in a diary. Assume, if you will, the identity of Mirror. The year is approximately 2560 BC. Ruling over your existence is Khufu, a figure who transcends the status of a mere monarch, functioning instead as a terrestrial deity whose decrees possess the power to divert watercourses and cause massive mountains of carved rock to spring from the earth. You are in his service, in the precise hieroglyphic lexicon of your profession. Your rank is that of inspector. Under your direct authority serve roughly 200 laborers, a modest fleet of timber vessels, and a temporal schedule that remains utterly indifferent to your exhaustion, the temperament of the climate, or your personal needs. Though your objective might sound straightforward, the reality is far more complex. You are charged with the transportation of high-grade white limestone from the Tura quarries situated on the eastern banks of the Nile, ferrying it across the expanse of the river and through a labyrinthine canal network to the foundation of a monument unlike anything previously envisioned in human history. At that site, the final, shimmering exterior skin of the Great Pyramid is being meticulously fitted course by course, block by block. The masonry you deliver constitutes the very facade that spectators will gaze upon 4.5 millennia into the future. Your existence is governed by a 10-day rotational cycle. At Tura, your vessels are loaded perhaps 30 massive blocks per boat, representing 70 or 80 tons of limestone, a weight comparable to a dozen elephants straining the hulls as they sit perilously low in the water. You then embark upon a 2 to 3 day transit to Giza, navigating channels that have been dredged, carved, and kept in operation by the administrative apparatus of the state. Your cargo is discharged at a bustling maritime hub known in the archives as Rashi Kufu, a facility that, in our current age, remains entombed and silent beneath the desert sands. Once the unloading is complete, the vessels are turned about, and the process initiates anew. 10 days later, the cycle repeats on a pristine morning. From the vantage point of the river, the pyramid comes into view, dominating the plateau. It already surpasses in scale any structure ever raised by humanity. You catch glimpses of the white casing stones catching the early sunlight where your own deliveries have been permanently installed. You are not the designer. Your name will never be memorialized in a shrine, nor illustrated upon a tomb wall. You are a logistics specialist, a transporter of material, merely one vital component in an assembly line involving tens of thousands of souls. Yet, without individuals like you, without the punctual arrival of fully laden boats, cycle after 10-day cycle, that monolith on the horizon would never reach completion. The detail that fundamentally alters our understanding is this: you documented every aspect of it. Mirror's diary is no epic narrative of heroism. It is a ledger, stark, repetitive, and precise. Within 2 neat columns, he recorded his team's itinerary, the nature of their cargo, and the duration of each voyage segment. He chronicled the evenings spent in transit, the loading procedures, the offloading, and the identities of the bureaucrats, to whom he reported a hierarchical chain of command, extending upward to a man named Enkoff, the king's half-brother, who held ultimate oversight in the truest sense. This represents the earliest instance of bureaucratic paperwork in our possession. Consider the broader implications of that documentation. It encompasses the activities of a single crew, directed by one man over a span of merely a few months, near the conclusion of a project that had persisted for decades. That record alone consumed entire scrolls of papyrus with its methodical, patient accounting. If you were to extrapolate that volume across every team, every supervisor, and every crew involved throughout the 20 years required to raise the pyramid, the figures transcend imagination. Behind that mountain of administrative records lay a vast machinery of quartermasters, inspectors, and scribes, an entire bureaucracy brought into existence to facilitate a single edifice. Nothing of this sophistication had previously materialized anywhere on the planet. Egypt did not inherit this administrative and logistical infrastructure. Rather, it was forced to innovate the system from the ground up as the construction progressed. We shall explore the weight of that truth later. For now, simply grasp the magnitude of the endeavor. Neither Mirror nor his men performed this labor on empty bellies. Situated 400 meters south of the Great Sphinx is a location that, until relatively recently, remained completely unknown. In 1988, archaeologist Mark Lenner and his team began excavating adjacent to an ancient barrier. The local populace had long dubbed the Wall of the Crow. What they unearthed, season after diligent season, was an urban center, the lost settlement of the pyramid builders themselves, covering more than 17 acres. It contained an intricate grid of courtyards, lanes, and thoroughfares. Rows of galleries housed the laborers in barracks-like conditions. There were enormous granaries and bakeries, constructed on a scale far exceeding any private household's requirements, churning out thousands of loaves of bread in massive, bell-shaped ceramic vessels, the shattered remains of which are still found piled across the site today. At its peak, this town and its surrounding operations supported a workforce numbering in the thousands. Conservative estimates suggest that as many as 20,000 individuals rotated through it during the construction years. This was not a forced labor camp. It was, for its time, one of the most effectively managed and densely populated towns globally. Its primary function was the sustenance of its people. Archaeologist Richard Redding has dedicated much of his career to analyzing the faunal remains discarded in the town's refuse heaps, identifying over 150,000 fragments of goat, sheep, and cattle. Through this, the daily menu has been reconstructed on average. Roughly 2 tons of meat were slaughtered and distributed among the laborers each day. To maintain such a supply chain is staggering to the contemporary mind. Redding estimates that Giza's requirements necessitated a standing herd of nearly 22,000 cattle and upwards of 50,000 sheep and goats, grazing across hundreds of square miles in the Nile Delta and driven south to the plateau in a constant, state-managed procession. This was no random foraging. It was a program of national logistics orchestrated by the state to fuel the appetites of its workforce. The distribution of this food was not egalitarian, a fact that speaks volumes. The overseers residing near the city's primary entrance consumed beef, the highest status protein in ancient Egypt, while the laborers in the galleries relied primarily on mutton and goat. A social hierarchy existed at the dining table, as it has at most tables throughout history. Nevertheless, the central reality remains: every single one of these men was provisioned daily by the authority of the state itself. As Redding has frequently noted, the workforce at the pyramid site almost certainly enjoyed a higher standard of nutrition than what they could have expected in their ancestral villages. Protein, however, was only part of the equation. To maintain his physical prowess, a man engaged in the strenuous labor of hauling stone required nearly 50 grams of protein daily. The remainder of his sustenance was derived from other sources, including Nile fish, lentils, beans, coarse loaves of bread prepared in those massive bakeries, and the dense, soupy ale that served both as a staple beverage and a component of the workers' compensation. When injuries occurred, as was inevitable for men tasked with maneuvering such massive stone, medical assistance was provided. The skeletons recovered from the necropolis bear clear somatic evidence of this harsh reality: broken legs, crushed hands, fractured arms, and spinal columns degraded by years of heavy lifting. Yet these marks also convey an optimistic narrative. The fractures were meticulously aligned and splinted. Many display the distinct indicators of genuine surgical proficiency, with limbs bound and mended sufficiently for the individual to recover and resume his duties. A few even reveal evidence that complex surgeries were performed and survived. This was a labor force supported by professional healers. A society does not treat individuals as expendable when it prioritizes their medical care. One does not nourish disposable labor with high-grade beef, nor does one invest the time to carefully mend its shattered bones. Such actions are reserved for something of tangible value. Consequently, the builders of the Great Pyramid were not the casualties of an oppressive state. Rather, they were among its most cherished resources, provided with housing, wages, sustenance, and care, because their contribution was viewed as beyond price. Mirror filed his final report during the 27th year of Khufu's reign. Subsequently, the documentation simply ceases. The monarch passed away, the massive undertaking gradually wound down, and the laborers who had elevated the world's most colossal structure packed their tools, shuttered their galleries, and departed for their homes. Yet, the riddles they left in their wake remain profoundly active. This brings us to the genuine enigmas. There are 3, and their complexity intensifies as we ascend from the river, through the masonry, into the sealed subterranean voids. We begin with the river, or rather, its absence. For decades, a singular conundrum persisted. The Great Pyramid encompasses over 2 million individual blocks. The superior limestone casing originated from Tura, located on the far Nile bank. while the granite components were sourced from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers south. Certain granite beams situated deep within the structure, above the mortuary chamber, weigh as much as an overloaded commercial lorry, perhaps 80 tons apiece, and every single one necessitated that grueling trek. Today, however, Giza occupies an arid plateau bordering the desert, devoid of water. Transporting such immense stone across open sand using only human musculature would have been near impossible. So, where was the Nile? In 2024, a team directed by geoscientist Eamon Ghanem of the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, unveiled the solution in the journal Communications, Earth, and Environment. Utilizing deep core drilling, ground-penetrating surveys, and radar satellite imagery, they traced the vestige of a long obliterated waterway. A Nile branch they dubbed the Ahramat, the Arabic term for pyramids. It once coursed for approximately 64 kilometers along the base of the western desert, reaching half a kilometer in breadth and 25 meters in depth in certain areas. Crucially, it flowed directly past 31 pyramids. The Great Pyramid included. The concluding detail is hauntingly elegant. The ceremonial causeways, the massive stone ramps, projecting from each pyramid, intersect the ancient channel at perfect right angles, terminating precisely where its banks once rested. The temples positioned at their termini were not merely ritual sites. They were maritime harbors. The stone arrived by vessel, almost to the doorstep. Then, the river vanished, as a prolonged, severe drought gripped the region 4,200 years ago. The branch shifted eastward and silted up, occurring almost exactly as the golden age of pyramid construction drew to a close. The very waterway that rendered the pyramids possible may have, through its retreat, contributed to their end. Currently, virtually nothing remains of it. A solitary modest canal near the Abusir site serves as the final, faint evidence of a river that once facilitated the construction blocks of an entire civilization. What enigmas remain? Quite a few. We still lack precise clarity regarding the harbor operations at Giza, the exact method by which each stone was elevated from the water and dragged the final distance onto the plateau, or whether every pyramid field possessed its own branch of the Nile. Regardless, the water only delivered the masonry to the base of the plateau. The most daunting segment of the voyage, the block-by-block ascent into the heavens, still lay ahead, and it remains a hurdle for us today. The river resolved one mystery, but it invited others. The second question is one everyone assumes they have already solved. How are the stones hoisted? The classroom response is a ramp. While ramps were certainly utilized, the simplistic, traditional version, a single, monolithic ramp spiraling up the exterior to a height of 150 meters, collapses under the weight of basic arithmetic. To maintain a gradient gentle enough for stone transport, that ramp would require a length nearing a mile, and it would necessitate more volume than the pyramid it was designed to serve. Conversely, wrapping it in an external spiral would bury the very corners that surveyors required to keep the structure's geometry precise. The conventional textbook solution cannot survive contact with the data. In March 2026, a novel concept emerged from an unlikely quarter. Writing in the journal NPJ Heritage Science, Vicente Rossel-Roig, an independent researcher possessing a doctorate in computer engineering, proposed the integrated edge ramp. His strategy? Place the ramp within the pyramid's own volume. As the structure ascends, construct a gentle, spiraling path along the four outer edges by omitting specific blocks, only to fill those voids later. This eliminates the need for a gargantuan external mound or a wasted mountain of rubble, allowing crews to operate across all four faces simultaneously. His computer modeling indicates that stone placement could occur every few minutes, permitting the monument to be finished within a single royal reign. By his estimation, the duration from initial quarrying to the final capstone would not exceed 20 to 27 years, fitting comfortably within the time frame of Khufu's rule. Significantly, his theorized internal pathways align with existing, unexplained voids detected within the structure. It is not the sole contender, however. There remains Michel Barsam's casting hypothesis, which suggests certain upper-level blocks were poured into molds rather than carved, and hoisted a claim which, if validated, would position the pyramid builders as essentially the world's inaugural industrial chemists. Other proposed methods involve the utilization of counterweight mechanisms and sledges lubricated by water. Yet one nagging inconsistency remains: copper is an inherently soft metal, whereas granite is punishingly hard. Given the millions of tons of stone shaped on that plateau, the fact that only a handful of tools have ever been retrieved is baffling. We shall return to that discrepancy momentarily. What, then, remains unresolved? Virtually everything. We should admit this plainly. There is no scholarly consensus regarding the elevation of the Great Pyramid. Whether it was achieved via external ramps, internal edge spirals, counterweights, or partial casting, the inquiry remains genuinely open. Even this year's most provocative proposal originated from a computer programmer rather than an Egyptologist. This does not represent a failure of the discipline. Rather, it highlights the honest and far more compelling state of the evidence. 4.5 millennia later, the most fundamental question concerning the world's most iconic edifice, simply, how was it hoisted into the heavens, lacks a definitive answer. The third mystery is the most enigmatic of all, as it remains sequestered behind stone walls for the majority of modern history. It was presumed that the interior architecture of the Great Pyramid was exhaustively documented: 3 chambers, a few passages, and that soaring corridor we identify as the Grand Gallery. It was thought to be entirely measured, mapped, understood, and closed. We were mistaken. Commencing in 2015, the Scan Pyramids initiative employed technology that would have been dismissed as sorcery by preceding generations of explorers. They interrogated the structure using muon's subatomic particles generated when cosmic rays strike the upper atmosphere. These particles rain down upon us incessantly, penetrating solid rock much like X-rays permeate human tissue. By positioning sensitive sensors within the pyramid and patiently tallying the muons arriving from various vectors, any region where an unusual volume of particles passes through indicates an empty space. In this manner, the interior of a stone mountain can be mapped without displacing a single pebble. It is a technique co-opted from particle physics and applied, for once, to the ancient world. In 2017, the team publicized their findings in the journal Nature, a substantial void located directly above the Grand Gallery, boasting a minimum length of 30 meters, comparable to the gallery itself. It represented the first major internal feature discovered within the Great Pyramid in over a century. The part that should give anyone pause is this: we remain ignorant of its purpose. Perhaps it served as a hollow space designed to alleviate the crushing weight upon the lower chambers. It might be a section of Roig's internal construction ramp that was walled up and abandoned once operations ceased. It could even be something entirely unforeseen. Some investigators suspect it is less a majestic chamber than a structural gap, a series of construction voids left in the masonry, never intended for human entry to date. No living person has ever set foot inside it. Further imaging is scheduled, and the pyramid may eventually yield its secrets. Yet, dwell for a moment on the simple truth of the matter: the most relentlessly studied, meticulously measured, and frequently surveyed building on Earth, picked over for 2 centuries, still conceals in its heart a rune the size of a cathedral nave that has never been beheld by a human eye. This leads us to a final inquiry, not how the feat was accomplished, but what the entire endeavor signified. View the bigger picture for a moment. When the papyrus ledgers, the workers' settlement, the diverted river, and the daily distribution of tons of meat are analyzed side by side. They compose a narrative far grander than the mere construction of a tomb. We initiated our search for the method of the pyramid's elevation. What we uncovered, embedded within the fragments of evidence, was something entirely distinct. We found the fingerprints of a civilization in the midst of inventing its own identity. To elevate the Great Pyramid, humanity was required to perform acts that had no precedent. For 2 decades, thousands of people had to be fed daily. They had to be housed, compensated, and provided with medical care for their injuries. Mountains of material had to be maneuvered down the Nile on a rigid timetable, with every shipment meticulously accounted for. None of that infrastructure existed when Khufu issued his command. There was no civil service equipped for the task, no pre-existing supply chain of such magnitude, and no system for transmuting a king's will into the coordinated daily labor of an entire nation. Consequently, Egypt constructed one. A bureaucracy of inspectors and scribes was formed. They administered the canals and harbors, the herds driven in from the delta, the bakeries, the granaries, and the work rosters kept in their thousands. All of it was either forged from scratch or vastly expanded to facilitate a single, overwhelming objective. Consider the true nature of each component: to document the man's daily progress so that it could be verified and tallied; to splint a fractured limb because a mended worker could resume his labor; to rotate the shifts, ration the ale, and coordinate a fleet of boats against the ebb and flow of the Nile. Every one of these was an essential act of statecraft, layered one upon another across 2 decades. These individual actions coalesced into the very machinery of governance. A perspective now shared by numerous prominent scholars suggests a reversal of the standard narrative rather than viewing the pyramid merely as a product of an already established Egyptian greatness. We might consider the inverse, in a fundamental and enduring capacity. It wasn't just the civilization that constructed the pyramid. The pyramid, in many ways, constructed the civilization. The centralized, literate, and organized state of Egypt, the entity that the world has revered for 3 millennia, was essentially forged through the relentless process of elevating that mountain of masonry. Ultimately, the tomb served as both the outcome and the catalyst. The stone pyramid we observe today is, in truth, the lesser of Khufu's 2 monuments. The superior one was the nation that mastered the ability to raise it. Perhaps the most perplexing element of this chronicle is that the very men who performed the task remained oblivious to the scale of their impact. Revisit the figure of Mirror for a moment. He was not intentionally inventing a nation-state, nor did he view himself as an architect of history. He was simply a project supervisor grappling with quotas and deadlines. He accounted for his masonry. He ensured his laborers were nourished. He delivered his vessels to Giza with punctuality, and he dutifully logged the details because such were the requirements of his immediate responsibilities. The grandeur was imperceptible to him, as it remains, almost universally, to those who actually participate in the forging of history. From the internal vantage point, destiny rarely feels inevitable. It feels like just another shift of labor. He never beheld the shadowed void sealed above the gallery. He remained ignorant that the waterway which bore his vessels would eventually disappear beneath the dunes, or that future generations would fiercely debate the methods by which his stones were hoisted skyward. He possessed only the tasks immediately before him, yet without fanfare. That work was in the process of fundamentally altering the globe. 4.5 millennia later, his ledger rests within a climate-controlled case at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the most ancient written testament to a man's professional life. Within its pages, the evolution of the ancient world into its historic form can somehow be discerned. One final observation remains a subtle detail that is easily overlooked, yet one we vowed to revisit, somewhere across the Giza Plateau. Over a span of 2 decades, laborers dressed, cut, and fitted well over 2 million stone blocks. This included soft limestone and granite, so dense it could dull a contemporary blade. Work of such immense proportions necessitates a staggering quantity of implements. Thousands upon thousands of copper tools must have been wielded, sharpened, and worn down until they were nothing but dust. And yet, of those massive quantities, only a negligible handful has ever been unearthed. The remainder have simply dissolved. They were perhaps melted down to reclaim their valuable metal. Lost to time or silently carted away, we remain uncertain. We know with absolute certainty that they existed. We are acquainted with the men who gripped them. We understand the intricacies of their daily lives, their diet, and their sleeping quarters, but the implements themselves? Where they retreated remains a mystery. For the moment, that inquiry lacks a definitive conclusion, and perhaps that is precisely where it should rest.